My name is Jason Green, and I'm the chair of the Montgomery County Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation. The County Council created our commission in 2019 to help the county understand our history with racial terror lynchings. There are actually 3 lynchings that occurred in Montgomery County between 1880 and 1896. Mr. George Peck, Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey, and Mr. Sidney Randolph. The soil ceremony that you're about to watch is for 2 of those men, 2 of those lynchings that occurred in Rockville, Maryland, Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Sidney Randolph. It was an opportunity for the commission to join with the Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project and the Equal Justice Initiative to make sure that there's a space for the community to come together, to better understand our history, but to also to honor these men, to put our hands into the soil, to say their names and acknowledge the places where they bled, where they sweat, and where ultimately their bodies were buried. It's important as you watch the soil ceremony to know that the fight for equal justice, the fight for social justice, they're not spectator sports. So after you watch the soil ceremony that took place on September 26, 2021, know that it's your responsibility to also share this story. And we welcome you to join us in this work.
listen, somebody's calling my name. And listen, somebody's calling my name. Oh, and listen, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, oh my Lord, tell me what shall I do? What shall I do? Well now soon, one morning, there came a creeping in my room. Yes, soon, one morning, there came creeping in my room. Yes, soon, one morning, there came creeping in my room. Oh my Lord, yeah, oh my Lord, tell me what shall I do? What shall I do? Well now, hush, 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 somebody's calling my name. Yeah, hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, people, hush, yeah, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, tell me what shall I do? My Lord, tell me what shall I do?
We will begin by saying the names of those being remembered today. Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey. Please say his name together with me 3 times. Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey. Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey. Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey. His name is called. There is no answer, but we remember. Mr. Sidney Randolph. Please say his name together with me 3 times. Mr. Sidney Randolph. Mr. Sidney Randolph. Mr. Sidney Randolph. His name is called. There is no answer, but we remember.
Out of all of our mouths, we speak their names together once more. Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey, Mr. Sidney Randolph. Lest we forget, we speak their names and we remember.
I am Leslie Young, and I serve on the steering committee of the Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project, or MoCoLMP. I welcome you into this time of remembrance. We are grateful to each of you for being here and for your willingness to reflect on this painful history, so that we all might remain present at this sacred event. We ask you to take a moment to just silence your cell phones. We are here today to recognize the horror and injustice of lynchings in our community and beyond. That is a truth. Another truth is that today we are gathering on the unceded land of the Piscataway Native people, knowing that there are many layers of injustice present on any square of land in this county or this country. We feel we must name this. Since 2018, MoCoLMP has been hard at work delving into the past as a way to move toward racial healing. As our guiding light, attorney Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative says, we cannot heal the deep wounds inflicted during the era of racial terrorism until we tell the truth about it. The Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project is proud to be recognized as one of EJI's community remembrance projects, and to have with us here today Elliot Spillers, who came all the way from EJI headquarters in Montgomery, Alabama, to be part of this event. He will be speaking later. We are grateful to the Montgomery County Council for establishing the Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation, which is our co-host for this event. Could the commission members who are here today please stand? Thank you. And we are grateful to Montgomery History, Peerless Rockville, the City of Rockville, Montgomery College, and so many organizations and individuals who are our partners, including our many volunteers. Could the Mayor of Rockville, Bridget Newton, and other elected officials of Rockville and Montgomery County please stand? Thank you all. I'd like to introduce Reverend Alexa Fraser, who serves with me in the leadership of MoCoLMP and is on the Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation. She is also a resident of Rockville.
Thank you, Leslie. I want to add a few more words of appreciation to Clinton African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, Jerusalem Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church, and Mount Calvary Baptist Church, and of course to the Jubilee Voices for the beautiful music and also their spiritual guidance in crafting this commemoration. They welcome you to sing with them whenever they sing. Let me also say that this event would not have happened without the support of Jim Stowe. Thank you, Jim. Jim is with the County Office of Human Rights. Before we continue, we'd like to pause and remember two giants of African American history and genealogy who have recently died. Gwendora Reese, better known as Gwen of Sugarland, and Sharon Duffin of Lincoln Park. Both made indelible contributions to their communities, to the collection and understanding of the history of their communities. They also both served on the MoCoLMP African American Advisory Committee. And even as we mourn their loss, we feel their presence with us today on this day that they spoke into the planning for. We will begin now with the painful stories that brought us here today. The lynchings that occurred in Rockville, very near where we sit or stand right now. We chose Welsh Park for this commemoration because it is at the intersection between land that was once part of Julius West Farm, where Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey was lynched, and the Anderson Farm, where we believe that Mr. Sidney Randolph was lynched. Thus, the soil beneath us holds the blood and tears of these terrible events. To share these stories, we welcome two outstanding students from Montgomery College. Patrick Ibanez for Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Ujo Avina for Mr. Randolph. These stories draw on the extensive research of Sarah Hedlund, archivist of Montgomery history, to whom we are also grateful.
We don't really know Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey's name. He could have been gone by John Diggs or John Dorsey. He might have used both names. The newspaper and the courts were impersonal. They just called him Diggs or Dorsey. We give him the title Mr. today to grant him the dignity he was denied in his lifetime. While there is much about Mr. Diggs-Dorsey that we do not know, we do know that before dawn on Tuesday, July 27, 1880, a mob dragged him from the Rockville jail, put a noose around his neck, pulled the rope up, and killed him. A man from Sandy Spring used this description to find him on the road to Olney late afternoon the day before. Based on what his sister told the district police, Mr. Diggs-Dorsey was a very black, round-headed man between 20 and 23 years old, 5 feet high, stammered when he talked, and blinked his eyes. He was a young, in the prime of his life, you might say, a farmhand. He would have been strong enough to walk from near Darnestown, where he worked, toward Olney, more than 15 miles away. What was the excuse for the lynching? Lenny Shefali, the wife of James Shefali, his boss, accused Mr. Diggs-Dorsey of assaulting her the Saturday before he was killed. He denied the charge and protested his innocence several times before he died. We don't know where Mr. Diggs-Dorsey spent Sunday, the day he was accused. Wherever he was, a mob had already formed to find him. Late Monday afternoon, he was picked up on the road to Olney. He wore a slouch hat, a white shirt, and dark pants. Zachariah Joseph Davis, a white man, offered to take him to what is now Olney. Partway there, Davis stopped his wagon at the store, asking Mr. Diggs-Dorsey to hold the reins. Davis went inside, then came back out with 3 men and a noose. They were ready to hang him. Instead, Davis took Mr. Diggs-Dorsey home, fed him dinner, and took him to the Rockville jail. According to Davis, he was willingly. He was turned over to Sheriff Kelchner about 11 o'clock. The sheriff feared a lynching and deputized a posse to prevent it. 4 hours later, James Shefali and 30 to 40 men marched in formation to the jail. Kelchner agreed to let Shefali in, but no one else. There was not enough. The mob stormed the jail. With the help of some people of the deputies, they subdued the sheriff. They took Mr. Diggs-Dorsey in shackles, more than half a mile down the road to Darnestown. The mob was met by a man on horseback who made them swear to secrecy about what they were planning. They put a noose around Mr. Diggs-Dorsey's neck, threw the rope around the limb of the cherry tree, and hauled him up. The men stayed a few minutes, then left, the corpse still swaying. As morning lightened, hundreds gathered. A doctor examined Mr. Diggs-Dorsey's body. A jury was formed and took witness. Injustice was swift. It declared that Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey died at the hands of the parties unknown. Pieces of the rope and his clothing were distributed as souvenirs. Someone took his slouch hat. His body was taken down and buried, his grave unmarked, in the potter's field at the county poorhouse.
Mr. Sidney Randolph was a long way from home as he walked along what is now Muddy Branch Road on Monday, May 25, 1896. Born and raised in Georgia, he had come to work up north in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and the district. He later said that he had walked up from Georgetown to Gaithersburg the day before, spending the night in a barn. 2 white cousins rode up to him, pulled up their horses, and started asking questions. To a black man walking alone in a southern state, this could only mean danger. He ran. They shot him, tied him up, and took him to the Rockville jail. The cousins were part of a force of vigilantes looking for the man who took the blunt end of an axe to the Buxton family, who lived in Gaithersburg across from the Methodist Episcopal Church South. Neighbors saw a man flee from a house nearby, assumed that he was the assailant, and said that he was black. Another black man, Mr. George Neal, was also arrested for the crime and joined Mr. Sidney Randolph in the Rockville jail. 5 other men, all black, were also arrested in connection with the assault on the Buxtons. The people of Gaithersburg were convinced that the assailant had been found. Over the next few weeks, investigations were launched, both professional and amateur. No physical evidence was found to implicate anyone, but rumors abounded and falsehoods flew. No motive was found for Mr. Randolph. The Buxtons, on seeing him in person, could not confirm that he bore the axe. The Rockville sheriff, John Collier, sent both Mr. Neal and Mr. Randolph to Baltimore. The sheriff feared that they would be lynched. They returned to Rockville after June 5th, when Sadie Buxton, age 7, died of her wounds from the assault. An inquest was held into her death on June 11th and 12th. Richard Buxton now asserted that Mr. Randolph was definitely the intruder who had bludgeoned his family. He expressed none of the doubt that he had shown less than 2 weeks before. The jury freed Mr. Neal and the others. It condemned Mr. Randolph, who was to be held until a grand jury met in November. It was said that Sheriff Collier, for fear of a mob, moved Mr. Randolph from the jail to a different place each night, but not the night of July 3rd. Early the next morning, before dawn on the 4th of July, the mob came, disguised with red handkerchiefs. 20 or 30 strong, they overpowered the jailer and dragged Mr. Randolph to the street. As he fought and screamed, "Murder!" they struck him on the head to subdue him and put him in a wagon. The mob followed a circuitous route down the Darnestown Road, then to a chestnut tree at the edge of the farm on Frederick Road. Once there, Mr. Randolph fought once again, but the mob laid a noose around his neck. They tied him up, hauled him up, and held him up, choking until he died. His body hung for hours. Afterward, wagon tracks were found that led toward Gaithersburg. A coroner's jury met that day. 40 witnesses were heard from over the next 9 days, and the grand jury met in November, but no one was charged with the murder of Mr. Randolph. Like Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey, Mr. Sidney Randolph was buried, his grave unmarked in the potter's field at the country poorhouse.
Thank you. We will now present a proclamation by the Montgomery County Council. Here to read it is Council Member Hans Reamer. We'd like to invite Mr. Reamer and any other members of the County Council to step forward, and the words are printed in your program.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hans Reamer, and I'm with the council. I'm really pleased to be here with you today on this important occasion. And I'd like to thank everyone with MoCoLMP and with the Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation, Reverend Stowe, so many community leaders coming together on this day. I'd like to recognize my colleague, Andrew Friedson, who's here with me. We recently worked together to change the name of a few streets you might have seen driving around town that were named for J.B. Stewart and the other Confederate officer whose name is escaping me. Jubal Early, thank you. Isn't it amazing that Montgomery County had streets named for minor Confederate military officers, not a street named for Josiah Henson, one of the greatest abolitionist heroes of the 19th century, a man whose story inspired Harriet Tubman's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which helped create the social fervor to finally wage war and end slavery. Not a street, not a court, nothing named for Josiah Henson. Multiple buildings and streets and places named for Confederate officers. It's just a symbol of what happened after the Civil War and how this county and the state and this whole country slid into an accommodation with the forces of the Confederacy and struck a new bargain that was upheld for generations through violence. And we're here today to commemorate two victims of that violence. And I'm here as a council member to recognize and acknowledge that the county government was an active participant in that racial caste system that produced outcomes that we struggle with today. And it is, of course, tragic that John Diggs-Dorsey and Sidney Randolph's murderers were never investigated or apprehended. And I firmly believe that it was probably widely known who was involved. But the county government, through its courts and its public safety and its governmental structure, simply let it go. Well, we're here today because, as our icon in this discussion, Brian Stevenson has said, we must confront the past and confront the truth. And like you, I'm finding it's a generational quest to learn the truth, and it will keep going. But I'm going to read a proclamation on behalf of the County Council to commemorate Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Sidney Randolph, and we recognize it doesn't restore what was taken from them, but it is a recognition. Whereas lynchings were violent public acts of racial terrorism against African Americans in the United States, and were rooted in our country's history of enslavement and racism, intending to spread fear, intimidation, degradation, and control. And by the way, this is in your brochure and you can read along. And whereas the horror of lynching is reflected in the vigilante nature of the acts of mobs and the sanctioning of these acts by the citizens and by law enforcement, who usually took no meaningful step to stop these brutal murders. And whereas this history of racial terrorism has a legacy that continues today and is reflected in the racial wealth gap caused by inequities in business practices and housing, services, and educational opportunities, and in the mass incarceration of people of color in disproportionate numbers. And whereas local historians and the Equal Justice Initiative of Montgomery, Alabama, have documented that George W. Peck, memorialized in Poolesville, Maryland, in November 2019, and Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Sidney Randolph, being memorialized today, were lynched in Montgomery County, Maryland. And whereas the Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project, a local grassroots organization, and Equal Justice Initiative Community Remembrance Project, is collecting soil near the sites where Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Randolph were lynched to add to the collection at EJI's Legacy Museum to help Montgomery County residents understand the continuing impact of enslavement and racism to this day. Now therefore be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County hereby recognizes July 27th, 1880 and July 4th, 1896 as the days that the lives of Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Sidney Randolph were ended by acts of racial terrorism, and that the brutality and injustice of the lynchings of these two men will be remembered by the soil collected from this site this day of September 26th, 2021, and that this soil will serve up to remind us of our responsibility to understand our history and to work to repair and heal the damage of the past by acting in the present. Presented today and signed by Council President Tom Hucker and myself. Thank you.
I now have the honor to introduce to you the chair of the Montgomery County Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation, Mr. Jason Green. It has really been my joy and privilege to serve with Jason on the commission. He's an attorney, an entrepreneur, and an economic development expert. His impressive resume includes being associate counsel to President Barack Obama.
Thank you, Alexa. Serving with you is my great honor, and with each of you. And thank you for that. It means a great deal. Good afternoon. My name's Jason Green. It's a pleasure to be with you. As I was reflecting on today, I realized how fortunate I am to have had the opportunity to spend a great deal of time with my grandmother. She grew up in Quince Orchard, Maryland. I grew up in Gaithersburg, Maryland. The exact same place, worlds apart. It struck me at some point to ask her if we descended from slaves. I didn't know that part of our story. And interesting enough, she told me what I imagined someone told her, that slavery didn't exist in this part of Maryland. Now, my grandmother also told me to trust but verify. And so in verifying that sentence, I did my own research with the help of Tony Cohen, a dear friend and colleague. And I was prepared for the research to reveal something like a slave story originating in perhaps Montgomery, Alabama. I was not prepared for it to originate in Montgomery County, Maryland. For it to originate here, in Rockville. For those that went on the walk this morning, if you were on the Pilgrimage Remembrance Walk this morning, raise your hand. It was a tremendous turnout. We walked this morning past where my great-great-grandfather was enslaved. But slavery didn't exist here. Not in this part of Maryland. Not in our precious Montgomery County. These are the stories we tell ourselves, and we tell each other. For a lot of reasons, I'm sure. Perhaps to make our ancestors better, perhaps to make our history better, perhaps to make ourselves feel better. But they mask a reality, and that reality has a consequence. Can you imagine people saying, but lynching didn't exist in this part of Maryland? Maybe in Montgomery, Alabama, maybe in southern Maryland, maybe in the Eastern Shore, but certainly not in Montgomery County. But yes, here, right here. And it's why we're here. because telling this story accurately matters. We're here because what happened in Montgomery County is an abrogation of justice. Mr. Diggs-Dorsey, Mr. Randolph weren't just denied their rights to a trial. This wasn't just a crime against black people. This was a crime against humanity. They were denied their fundamental human rights, the right to dignity, the right to equality, the right ultimately to life. And so we gathered today to lift up these men whose lives were cut short by racist violence and racial subjugation, and to acknowledge the suffering experienced by those who lived on past them, their loved ones, their families, their communities. And we're also here because those heinous acts cast a long shadow. It's far too easy to dismiss these acts as aberrations, one-time events distant in the past with no bearing on today. But we know that the systematic denial of rights continues. We know that the violence and brutalization in the name of some corrupted sense of law and order continues. And so it's false to pretend that the lynchings of Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Sidney Randolph have no bearing on the present. We know communities have a long memory. And when a society employs violence and hate to show that we don't belong, that we are not entitled to the same basic rights as everyone else, that leaves a long and enduring and perverse legacy. Now, I don't mean to say that nothing has improved or that the damage is irreparable. The path to reconciliation is long and winding, but we are on it. And we are on it every day. This ceremony today is another step on that long and winding path. In 2019, the County Council, led by Mr. Reamer, created the Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation as another step on that path to help the community in our county address this terrible history. The Commission, my incredible colleagues, we have the great fortune to work with tremendous partners like MoCoLMP, like EJI, like Montgomery History, and others gathered here today to create a full and accurate accounting of Montgomery County's history with racial terror and violence. We work to collect the soil. We say the names. We erect the markers and the monuments. But most importantly, we work with you. You are a critical partner on that path towards reconciliation. Today, as we recognize crimes committed, it is us together that affirm our commitment to build a more just future, informed by that past. You see, racial justice work cannot just be a spectator sport. Now, what was that song you were singing? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. That song is a promise. Humming, would you please? Sometimes when we can't fight, we sing. Sometimes when our song is lost, we hum. That song is a commitment to what we'll do individually, what we'll do together. In my neighbor's house, even in the darkness, we will let it shine. In this moment, I'm reminded of something else that my grandmother used to tell me. She would say that the world is made up of all different kinds of people. So surround yourself with those who are willing to look around their community, see a need, and take action. Because those are the doers, and doers do. Well, my friends, I feel so fortunate to surround myself with those who find themselves on that side of the line. You are the doers. And now is the critical moment as we face this racial reckoning together, that we be reminded of who we are as a community. There's an important story to be told. There's important work to be done. And you are the ones to do it. Now that you've heard the story, what are you going to do with it? We know that the telling of the story matters. So we're so grateful that you're here. Thank you for coming together, but it can't stay here. This is just the beginning.
Over my head, I see trouble in the air. Over my head, I see trouble in the air. Over my head, I see trouble in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. There must be a God somewhere.
One of the privileges of being an EJI Community Remembrance Project is that we have ready access to the advice and insights of two of the talented staff at EJI. Brianna Briley-Lampkin, Project Manager, and Elliot Spillers, Justice Fellow. Whenever we struggle with how best to proceed or simply need reassurance that we've gotten it right, Bree and Elliot are there to brainstorm with us and offer their guidance and experience. Today I am pleased to introduce Elliot Spillers. This is his second time attending a MoCoLMP soil collection ceremony, the first being in Poolsville in 2019 to honor Mr. George Peck.
Thank you so much, Alexa, and hello, everybody else. Wow, we're at church today. Reverend Green. Wow, to the choir, thank you so much. Today's a beautiful day. The weather is perfect. And as Mr. Green mentioned earlier, I took part in the Remembrance Walk earlier today and was able to walk the path that the mob took when they kidnapped both Mr. Randolph and Mr. Diggs-Dorsey from the local jail and lynched them. And as I was walking that path and we were listening to the context of how these historic institutions and sites were created and established here locally, I contemplated the experiences of the Black citizens who have always lived in Rockville, who were enslaved in this community, and very likely walked that same path, had to confront those same buildings, had to at least try to find justice in an institution that denied justice to two Black men in this community. What must have their experiences been like, having to witness and bear witness to those spaces and these buildings that tell a very haunting history? Almost re-traumatizing many of them, probably. What must it have been like for the Black church in this community to likely have one of their own lynched? The families, the Black families, who likely heard the mob through the night, fearful for their own lives, and had to then witness the body of a man still left to hang in this community. Today, we are taking part in an opportunity to forge a new era of truth and justice, not just for Montgomery County, but for Maryland and the entire country as a whole. And that is something to be very proud of. For those that don't know, EJI is a human rights law office working out of Montgomery, Alabama, to represent the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned in our state jails and prisons. About 30 years ago, Attorney Brian Stevenson actually came to Montgomery, Alabama from Georgia to begin work in Alabama because there were a quarter of executions that were happening all across the country that were centralized right in the state of Alabama. And this was a human rights crisis that called Attorney Stevenson to come to Montgomery to represent people who were on death row and to give them adequate legal counsel, many of our clients could not afford to have the right to a sound and a reliable defense attorney. And so Mr. Stevenson responded to that call. And if you've heard him speak, many times on whether it's his TED Talk or some other speech he's giving, he always talks about the power of proximity. And he is a prime example of the magic that can be produced when we are proximate to our history, to the challenges of our time, but also with ourselves. And I think that today, going on that walk was a moment for me to be proximate with myself, but also this community that I'm not a part of, but has a history that does link back to me, and does link back to Montgomery County, Alabama, and does link back to the history of racial injustice and violence in this country. After 30 years of working to expose and challenge racial and economic bias in the criminal justice system, EJI found it necessary and crucial to begin a conversation talking about the way and challenging the way that we think and talk about race and the history of our racial and economic identity in this country. And so we began our Race and Poverty initiative with the intention of tangibly engaging people with our projects and institutions and reports and work and research, but also to allow them experiences that help to get them proximate to this history. And so our soil collection project comes under that umbrella of our Community Remembrance Project and our Race and Poverty Initiative. And if you've heard Mr. Stevenson speak about our soil collection project, he talks about how in the soil is the blood of those who labor through the indignation of slavery. In the soil is the sweat of those who had to endure the embarrassment and humiliation of Jim Crow segregation in the Deep South. But also in the soil is the opportunity for new life, the opportunity for growth. And our soil collection experience allows people to understand the circumstances of the individuals who were lynched in the community. In 2018, we opened up the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration. Both of those sites are narrative sites that allow people to understand and confront and connect with this broader history of racial and economic injustice in our country. The Legacy Museum features many interactive components and content, and our memorial is an outdoor space. And it actually has 800 columns that suspend. And when you first start in the memorial, the columns are all at eye level. And these columns, 800 plus, represent a county in America where we document racial terror lynchings to have happened. And so you start in the memorial and you're walking in and, you see these columns, and then when you enter the second corridor, you turn right and you begin to decline. You walk down a slope. And as you're walking down this slope, the memorial monuments actually begin to, in many ways, ascend. And so what that artistically is supposed to represent is what it must have been like to actually look up at an African-American man, woman, or child who had been lynched in this community, in a community. These monuments are cortine steel, and so they have this rusting effect as well. And so when it's been weathered, definitely you can see the red clay and residue, coming down these monuments, all of which have the names of Black men, women, and children, both known and unknown, who were lynched in a county in America. Black people in this country for centuries were kidnapped from their homes in, the dead of night, in the daytime, and they were dragged, in many cases, to the city center. And in these environments, they were there lynched. These were communal acts of violence. And as an organization, we're very intentional about defining racial terror lynchings. And we define racial terror lynchings as the intentional killing of an African-American man, woman, or child that includes by means of hanging, drowning, poisoning, burning, mutilation, and other acts of racial violence that leads to killing at the hands of 3 or more white individuals, but with the intention of not just terrorizing the individuals, but the entire Black community as a whole. It wasn't just enough to lynch an individual in this county in the county center or on the grounds of the courthouse lawn. Their bodies, in the case of Mr. Randolph, were oftentimes left to hang for hours as a symbol to any black person that ever tried to step outside of the racial hierarchy and order of the time. Lynchings were a way of maintaining racial and economic control and dominance over the entire black community. And as I was walking through this community of Rockville today, and I was actually situating myself in the space and the history of this environment, this is a town and a community that was very black, historically black. And where has the history of these businesses, black businesses that were in the town center, and these people gone? In many ways, you can attribute that to this history of racial injustice and violence. The Great Migration, where 2 million black people fled the Deep South as refugees from violence and moved to states outside of the Deep South and the Upper South, which I include Maryland in. They then moved to New York and California for opportunities, but when they came to those new areas and those new communities, they weren't met with welcoming arms. They were still met with violence and terror. And this disconnect between the Southern experience and the Northern experience as it pertains to racial injustice and hierarchy is a myth that as an organization we're very intentional about correcting. I invite all of you to come to Montgomery, Alabama and connect with our spaces and connect with our sites. I encourage you all to visit our museum and one day see this jar of soil, both jars of soil, all 3 jars of soil, I should say, for Mr. Peck, and then also now for Mr. Randolph and Mr. Diggs-Dorsey in our museum as a symbol of your commitment to ensuring this history is not repeated. I also encourage you all to engage with our memorial as well. Earlier we mentioned the process of installing historical markers in this community. And that's a communal process. And one day, we hope to have a historical marker, that actually talks about the lynchings of Mr. Peck, as well as Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Sidney Randolph in this community. And that talks about and contextualizes these buildings and institutions that were present and oftentimes complicit in their deaths. As we're engaging in this conversation, I also been in a very singing mood recently, and I actually listened on the way up here to the song Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that song, but it is the Negro national anthem. And I never really took time to listen to the lyrics. I've always just kind of known spiritually and bodily, what to say and, how to mimic the words, but the lyrics are very powerful, very powerful. And so as a close, and leading into the soil collection experience, I wanted to read the lyrics from Lift Every Voice and Sing, and hopefully give you all something to inspire you and to encourage you, I think, to not only lift the voices of Mr. John Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Randolph today, but the voices of those individuals in this community who might be silenced, whose histories might not be known, and for the people who aren't here with us today, who should be. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty, high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod. felt in the days when hope, unborn, had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last. Where the white gleam of our bright star has cast, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way. Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you so much.
So good. Thank you. Thank you. Now is the time when we invite you to help fill the jars of soil. We have combined the soil collected here at Welsh Park with soil gathered near the sites where Mr. Diggs-Dorsey and Mr. Randolph were lynched and buried. 1 jar for each man will be held at EJI's Legacy Museum, along with jars of soil from other counties where lynchings occurred. Also keeping these sacred objects will be Montgomery History, the Menair Foundation, and Mr. Jim Stowe on behalf of the Commission on Remembrance and Reconciliation. They will be used to help educate our county on this painful legacy for years to come.
One of the commitments of MoCoLMP is to involve youth, people coming up, the next generation on whom we rely. Not to say that it's not our job too. So we have a group of youth, thank you very much, who will be carrying the jars in silent and respectful procession. This is a solemn moment. Please join them, follow them, and you will go to one of the pre-dug areas to scoop some soil into a jar. For those who may find it difficult to get down on the ground, we have provided a raised site also for collection. If the jars should fill before you have had a chance to add some soil, we invite you to place a hand on the jar for a brief moment. Our ceremony today will conclude with words from Pastor Alice Walker Johnson of Clinton AME Zion Church. So we will be in silence from the time that we leave this space to move towards the soil collection area. After the soil is collected and everybody has had a chance to either put a bit of soil into a jar or to touch it, the jars will be carried by our wonderful volunteers north, south, east, and west to signal the hope for racial equality, justice, and reconciliation. As I said, please hold a time of silence until all have left the soil site. Could our jar carriers please lead us on our way?
Danger in the water. Ain't no danger in the water. Ain't no danger in the water. Get on board. Get on board. It was good for my dear mother. It was good for my dear mother. It was good for my
cannot preach like Peter, if you cannot pray like Paul, you can tell the love of Jesus who died to save us all. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul.
I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. Fighting for our freedom, we shall not be moved. Fighting for our freedom, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. When my cross is heavy, I shall not be moved. If my cross is heavy, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. Church of God is marching, I shall not be moved. Church of God is marching, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. Jesus is our captain, I shall not be moved. Jesus is our captain, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. Fighting sin and Satan, I shall not be moved. Fighting sin and Satan, I shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the water. I shall not be moved.
So we're ready for if you want to do a soil collection, please do it now. Please do it right now. The silence is not going to hurt them. If you go around, just want to go around and allow yourself to collect soil. Amen. Amen.
They'll be shouting, children. They'll be shouting. They'll be shouting over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom. Children. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave.
No, I'm saying
And go home to my Lord and be free. We end the way we began. We heard it in the streets the last couple of years. Say his name. Say her name. And so today, we're here on sacred soil, speaking the name Mr. John Dorsey Diggs. Certainly, if I can say the name of Alton Brown, if I can say the name of Michael Brown, if I can say the name of George Floyd, I can say the name of John Dorsey Diggs. Open your mouth and say his name. Mr. John Dorsey Diggs. There was certainly no silence then, but we paused for the Spirit to speak. We allow ourselves a moment of silence to honor as we stand. Somebody said, Pastor, where are your shoes? I'm on sacred ground. Hold on.
I'm on holy ground.
Yes.
Say his name, Mr. Sidney Randolph.
Mr.
Sidney
Randolph.
Mr. Sidney
Randolph.
We close yet as we open, not hearing an audible response from these brothers, but they are speaking today. They are speaking through your presence. They are speaking in soil collected from sacred ground. They are speaking for themselves and the countless others whose voices were stilled by violence and hatred, inequality. But you know, today, I believe this, that even as they speak from the soil, you and I must take from the soil, not just a jar that will sit in a museum, yes, to educate, but from the soil of our souls, from the soil of our hearts. We must take from this place a new resolve, not just to remember, that is part of resistance, but resistance also requires me to do more than remember. Resistance says that I must speak the truth to power wherever injustice occurs. Resistance says that I must show myself one who is serious about equality, about justice, about racial reconciliation. One who says that even as we gather today, white and black and red and yellow and brown, that this can't be the only time we gather, that we must find a way to gather together. So as we leave this sacred place, we leave not celebrating, for surely we are here to remember. We leave not chit-chatting about what a great program it is, but reflecting on the weight, not just of the soil that is in a jar, but the weight of the soil that is in our hearts and in our souls as we speak names that long ago were cut off way too soon, without justice, without equality, without even a chance to be treated equally under the law. We leave here today feeling the weight that we're not just speaking about history from yesterday, but we also bear the stain and the mark
of injustice and equality right now, and we must feel that weight, and we must carry it. The students are carrying the soil. They're doing it for you, and they're doing it for me, reminding us that we've been on holy ground, that this is sacred space, reminding us that we bear a sacred weight as we leave here, reminding us that the weight of racial equality, reconciliation, justice, and peace in America does not rest on generations that have passed. They are part of the great cloud of witnesses. Not for Mr. Dorsey Diggs, not for Mr. Randolph. The weight is on us. As we leave here, I pray that you leave here in silence, that you'll let that weight sit on you just a little while. And then as you begin to get used to the weight, that you will get up and get busy. For surely that is the resistance, is to continue to fight. We gather together today. We'll close the way we do it at Clinton. And I was in the spirit on the Lord's day. And an angel came and took me up on a mountain high, and I looked and I saw men and women, boys and girls. They were black and white and red and yellow and brown. They were holding hands and singing praises to our God. I asked the angel, who are they? The angel said, those are the children of the Most High God. I wanted to know, well, where are they? The angel said, they're already over in heaven. I knew this thing was a vision. So I asked the angel, when is this vision of mine going to fully be true? The angel said softly, when all of God's children truly learn to love one another. Let that weight of love go with you from this sacred place. Let it be so, even as the soil has spoken and their souls are at rest. Bless you.
I shall not be moved, just like a tree.